Benefit of learning scales. In prior presentations, we discussed four major areas or four major starting points that many instructors and many learners start with when learning the guitar, suggesting that we should think of them at the beginning as four different areas that we're learning basically independently, but with the understanding and vision that they're like four paths that will converge at some point in the future. Those include learning basic chords so that we can play songs with them, learning basic scales such as the pentatonic scale, learning power chords, and then learning basic theory. We discussed the learning basic chords last time. We're going to dive deeper into the learning basic scales this time. I think this is one of the more confusing kind of components, and I'll try to discuss why that is. It's not because learning scales are difficult in and of themselves, but it's often difficult to know which scales to learn and what patterns to be using when memorizing or learning those skills. So I'll make some suggestions in terms of learning scales to make it an easier transition. So we'll start off learning the benefits of knowing scales or practicing scales, and then we may get into some more detail in future presentations in terms of how to learn scales or what's the best approach, although we'll touch on that here as well. So what are the benefits of learning scales? Learning scales like the pentatonic scale, which is going to be one of the major patterns that guitar players will typically start out learning, allow you to practice in different positions on the neck of the guitar. So when you're working with open chords like an A chord or a G chord or an E chord, you're working down here at the end of the guitar. Or if you want to look at it this way, then you're working down here towards the nut. This is going to be position 0 or fret 1, fret 2, fret 3, so on. This is the big E string up top, small E string down at the bottom. You'll be working towards this end, towards the open positions when you're working with basic chords, an A chord, an E chord, and so on. When you work with the pentatonic scale, I would suggest practicing and starting out your practice somewhere else so that then you can merge these two things together. So I would recommend then starting your practice here on position on 5, on fret 5 as your first position. I'll talk more about why that would be or why I think that's a good place to start your pentatonic positions in the future. And that's one of the things that make the pentatonic scale and learning it a little bit more confusing because you can move the thing around depending on what key you are playing in. But in any case, I would start here with position 5, and that allows you to think of the position 5 or your first position as basically home with regards to the pentatonic scale. And then when you start learning the other positions, 5 different pentatonic positions around it, you can learn it more naturally growing outwards. You can grow outwards this way and learn it more naturally rather than starting here basically at the nut and then learning only in one direction. And the reason that's going to be easier is because it's kind of like when you learn the directions from your home. You know, you're trying to learn what's around you when you live somewhere. You don't typically just go in one direction and say, oh, I learned everything that's to the west of me or something like that, right? You learn everything in around you. So it's the same kind of with the guitar. If you think of position 5 as home, then it's going to be easier for you to kind of start playing around those positions and learn the positions next door, which are on both sides, as opposed to if you start over here, you can only learn the positions basically going one way. So that's one reason I would start with position 5, and then you'll be able to kind of merge these things together when you start saying, okay, here's what I'm playing in terms of my open positions. How do they fit into the scale patterns that I'm looking at? And that's when you kind of merge this caged pattern and your pentatonic scales and your major scales all together. They allow you to see patterns and connect patterns. So when you start learning the pentatonic scales, then you're really learning patterns that happen. You can try to read the notes within the pattern that you're looking at, but most people basically start the pentatonic scale knowing where they're starting at, meaning you start to memorize the notes on the top string here. And in our case, it's going to be an A and a C will be the first in the pentatonic. And then the rest of it, you're basically just simply memorizing a pattern at first. You can go back and look at the notes and try to look at them, and that would be a good practice to do. I'll talk more about how that can be done later as we kind of see the major scale and how the pentatonic scale kind of fits into it. But basically, you're learning a shape here, and then once you learn the 5 shapes that will cover the entire fretboard, you'll see the whole fretboard in terms of shapes. And that would be great if you can kind of move your fingers around to just know shapes on the fretboard, even if you do not know what you're playing. You can still kind of move around and play stuff that makes sense, right? Without really thinking about it. You're not saying, hey, I'm playing this note or anything like that. You're just saying, hey, this fits in this shape, and this shape connects to that shape, and they all fit together. So learning major scale patterns help to memorize notes on the guitar. So when we go to the major scale patterns, then we'll start to see that you can actually count up and down as you play the major scale patterns. They'll be in order. So you can play something like this will be in a major scale A, B, C, and then D, E, F, G, A. And if you play that pattern, then and you actually sing the alphabet as you play it and play it backwards, that's going to be helpful to kind of memorize the notes on the guitar so that you don't just know the patterns but also know the notes within them. So to practice the first position on the pentatonic scale, here's a link to a lesson on that first position that goes into it in some detail. You can find a lot of different things on the pentatonic scale, but once again, remember that they're going to be moving it across the fretboard, which can be confusing. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So this is an area when you look at research and you try to just get some YouTube videos on it, it's hard to get them all to line up because they might be playing the pentatonic scale in different keys. And if you're just learning it, you might want to learn it in one position first. So I'll get into that in more detail in a second here. But so for example, we can take a shape and play it in a different position on the neck. So we can take one shape, obviously, and move it to a different position on the neck. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more here. But again, that's one of the areas that can be a little bit confusing. So I would first not do that. I would first try to learn all the 5 positions in one static position on the neck, and then think about moving it, or try to keep them separate in your mind, right? You're trying to think of them, you're trying to memorize everything in one position first, and I would start out with the A, C position, right? Which would be an A minor or a C major position. So then the question is, well, what kind of scale should we learn? Should we learn a pentatonic scale? We got a major scale. We have the caged system, which is basically not so much a scale, but it's a pattern that can be movable, and that movableness and the fact that it kind of fits in with the scales kind of blends into what I would think about as the same kind of thing. You'll see how it all kind of fits together. And so again, this is an area where many instructors will do different things, right? Some people might go to the pentatonic scale. Those will be more kind of guitar folks, and then some people might use the major scale, and those are often people that may be moving from a piano or traditional music theory and go into the guitar, might want to focus more there. And then you might have people that focus in on the caged system, which is basically moving up your shapes, your chord shapes, because they started off learning the chord shapes. So I would recommend learning the pentatonic scales because you're learning your chord shapes in the open positions over here, and we'll talk, and you can see how they'll work in the caged system later and how they all kind of fit together. But I would learn the chord shapes on the open position and then think about learning the pentatonic scales then elsewhere, starting with position 5. So for example, this would be then shape 1 of our pentatonic scale. So let me see if I can break this kind of worksheet down here. First of all, why would I call it shape 1? Notice that's kind of a convention, but many people will basically use that convention. One is that this is going to be the most popular, basically, shape. This is like the main shape of the pentatonic scales where most people typically start off learning, and then they'll learn the 4 other shapes that will branch off for it or will be connected to it. So that's why I would first learn this shape. Now you can learn this shape in different areas. I mean, we could have learned this shape down here basically on E or something like that, and then learn the other shapes around it. There's a couple reasons why I would start with this shape. 1, it's the most popular shape, and then 2, that I would start it on the 5th fret, because 1, that's the middle of the guitar. So once you learn these blue items here, this pattern, then you can branch out in an organic kind of way, going both ways, just like learning the circumference of your house. You don't just go one way, you go both ways to learn, what's around you. And 2, this will be in the key of either, you could say, A minor or C major. And that's going to be something that's familiar to some people because 1, it'll show all of the major. There's no sharps or flats within this progression. And if you work with like a piano, if you look at a piano and we're playing on the piano, then if you were playing all the white keys basically on the piano, you'd be playing in the key of C major or A minor. So it's kind of familiar in that way as well. Also, this is going to be a position if you're playing in C major or A minor, where all the open positions, if we look at the other shapes that will be connected, all the open positions here will basically be in the pattern, except for this one down here, B, but it will be in the major pattern as well. So all the open positions being in the pattern is useful because once you learn the pattern, like you can hold down position 5, go to position 8 or fret 5 to fret 8, and then you can let go, take your fingers off of the guitar, and play an open position, open string, which will play something that will fit in the pattern as well. So if you're learning the pattern in such a way that the open positions fit in it, then as you move your fingers from one position to the other, you can kind of still strum on the open position, and it'll still sound good because the open position also fits into the pattern. So that's a useful thing to have. So those are the reasons I'd basically learn this on position 5. Now, you might feel kind of limited. You might say, well, then I'm only playing in A minor or C, depending on basically how I'm playing in it. But just realize there's a whole lot of things you could do. There's like an infinite amount of things you can do simply in, those keys. Now, if you wanted to move this up, you can move any of these positions up. So you could play this whole position here, starting on fret 10, and you would no longer be playing an A minor or C, but rather a D minor or F major. And so you can do that, but once you start moving it up, it's going to be difficult to connect the shapes together. So when you start to connect the shapes together, you typically want to start at one position, learn the whole fretboard in basically that one position, and then start to move the whole thing up into another position in another instance. So I would start here. This would be the first position, started on fret 5. You can see the video will go into what your fingering should be basically on these positions. But you got 5th, 8th, and then the second string, the A string. You've got the 5th to the 7th, and then the 5th to the 7th, and then the 5th to the 7th, and then the 5th to the 8th, and then the 5th to the 8th. That's going to be the standard kind of pentatonic pattern. Now, if you were to connect this pentatonic pattern, I won't go into a lot of detail with it at this point in time, but just note that if you kind of memorize this pattern, then you can start to think about how could I connect it to the rest of the patterns. Now, these green areas also fit. These are the other, 4 positions of the pentatonic pattern. So, and by the way, pentatonic means 5. So our musical, if you get into a little bit of the theory here, the musical alphabet has 7 notes in it, and you break it down then to 5 for the pentatonic pattern. One of the reasons the pentatonic pattern is so nice on the guitar is it just sounds good no matter basically how you play it. So you can't really mess up the pentatonic pattern too easily. It works well. So if you learn the pattern across the fretboard, you can play all the way across the fretboard pretty cleanly. And you can see if you look at the notes that will be involved in it, you basically got 5 of the 7 notes that are involved as we play in the key of A minor or C major. So then once you learn this position, you can kind of move them and learn the second position. So I won't get into a lot of detail on, the fingering and whatnot on the second position. What I really want to just kind of emphasize is that you probably want to start playing them in one location, right? So I'm going to say this is position 1, P1, and it's going to be starting on the 5th position. You could move position 1 to start anywhere and play the same pattern. You would then be playing in a different key, but I would always memorize it as position 1, in your pentatonic patterns wherever you play it. That's a convention, but I think it's a good one. And then I would say that my home base is where I live then is in the middle of the guitar. So typically my home position 1 home would then be the 5th fret, playing position 1 on the 5th fret. And then you can learn the second position, the one that connects to position 1, and it would look like this. You can see that this item's down here, same columns, kind of roll down, and then these green items have now turned blue, and this would then be these blue items. That pattern then is position 2. I would call this position 2 now, right next to position 1 here. It's connected, so half of it is part of position 1, but your whole hand then moves up. And you can look at presentations and videos on how to move your hand up and whatnot, but just remember that they might play this whole position in another area of the guitar depending on what key they're playing it in, and that's kind of the tricky part. The hand position, will be the same wherever you play it generally, except in the open position possibly. So you can see the same letters here are here, right? The same notes are included. The same notes are excluded as you move it up to the second position. So you're playing the same notes just higher up, scaling it up on the guitar. And then the end of this position, this would now be position 3. So now you're moving to position 3. these two items are the same. These green items have now turned blue, so now you're in position 3, moving your hand up, playing the same notes. You can see these notes are the same notes up here, they're just in a different order. And then of course if you took this and you go to position 4, this would be position 4, and these are distinct positions that your hand can basically memorize. So if you play these up and down on the scale, they're meant to kind of fit your hand pattern. So if you were to play this up and down on the scale, again, you'll find many presentations on your fingering and just kind of playing it up and down. Just know the only thing I just want to point out here is kind of finding the home position. That's where it gets kind of confusing. Okay, and then if you go back to position 1 in the home, if I go back home to position 1 on the 5th fret, and then I move the other way back towards the nut, back towards the 0, then I would go back from position 1 back to the thing, because there's only 5 positions. Back behind position 1 will be position 5. Now again, I know that's a little bit confusing because we put position 1 in the middle of the guitar, right? But we put it there because home should be in the middle of the guitar. So that means behind position 1 is position 5. So now we got position 5 because it's going around in a circle. And this would be position 5. So now this side is connecting to these green items are now blue, connecting up there. And then if we go back to position 4, we go back here to position 4, which can be a little bit confusing because this 0 item is the nut, meaning you don't have to put your finger on this E here because it's the nut. So your fingering will be different on the 0 position. So we might go into that in a little bit more detail, but just note there's a lot of presentations on the pentatonic scales. Just realize that they may not always be playing it in A minor or C, right? They may not be playing it in this position. So they'll be playing the same positions, but they might move it up. And you can't easily move up all the positions, connect them, because your hand memorizes where it should go on the neck of the guitar. It doesn't memorize relative. Your muscle memory doesn't necessarily memorize relative to the prior position that it played, right? So it's hard. So you can move up one of these positions fairly easily, like this one. You'll see many people just take this main position. If they want to play in the key of, D minor, they'll move it up here and whatnot. And you could play that one position there. But if you connect that one position to position 2, it becomes more difficult to see on the neck. It's for your memorization of the hand. So I would try to memorize the whole thing, one at a time, one position at a time. This way, and then move it from that point. Recognizing that this would take a long time, I would say the starting point would be to learn position 1 on fret 5 and just see, we're just looking forward to what would happen in the future to then connect them up to the other 5 positions here. Now, I'm not going to get into the cage system in detail, but this is I just want to touch in on it because it's a common thing that people will hear about, and it goes into our concept of connecting up, which will happen in the future. Again, talking in the future, as you start to learn these things and look forward, then you could say, okay, well, I'm learning on the end of the guitar my open positions like an A chord, a C chord, and whatnot, and then I'm hearing about this cage system, which means I can basically move those positions up. But how does that work? How does it work if I move the positions up? Then what key am I playing in, and so on and so forth? And how does it tie into my pentatonic scales? So just for an example, how this kind of ties in, just a quick example. Notice that this is position 1 here. These are the dark blue. The dark blue, not the light blue, is our position 1 pentatonic scale. And then if you were to take, say, a G chord, this is then like playing a G chord in the open position, and then barring off the nut, and then moving it all up, these red items then would be the G shape. So position 1, which we're playing on the 5th fret, is basically a G shape, meaning if you played it back here in an open position, you'd be playing a G, because we're learning it in the open position. You learn that shape playing it in the open position. If you move that up, you would be playing a G shape chord, something that if in open position would be a G, but now will be driven by this note, which will be a C. So now it's a C with a G shape when you were in the open position. So again, that's just something to kind of look forward to in the future as you merge these things together. So the notes and then the pentatonic scale. Now we're taking a look at the same. Here's the pentatonic scale on position 5. Once again, A to C, D to E, G to A, and so on and so forth. And you might say, well, how does that fit into the major scale? So if you were to take a look at like all the white keys on the piano and play them out, you got 7 notes here. So how does that pentatonic 5 note fit into the major scale 7? Well, then you can lay on top of this. I would first learn the pentatonic scale because it's easier and you can connect it all out and you can play something that sounds good on it, and then kind of learn the major scale, lay it on top of it, right? Lay the major scale on top of it. And the major scale is the pentatonic scale and adding the light blue. So the light blue have now been added to this pentatonic position. And if you played this same position here in the with the light blue, then you can play it this way. And note, this is really nice because if you learn this position, you can start to memorize the notes on the guitar by simply singing the alphabet as you finger these notes. Because you could finger this as you go. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. They'll be in order as you finger them. So you'll finger them in order. So if you play them, if you finger them and you can go one way and then actually say the alphabet in reverse, going the other way, which is actually difficult. I mean, I thought it would be easy, but it's not. So if you can play this going one way and then the other way, you can actually start to memorize the alphabet. You can't, or the actual chords or the notes on the guitar. You can't do it so much with just the pentatonic scale because you're skipping notes. You're going from A to C, right? D, E, then you're skipping F. But then if you learn the major scale, it'll actually be in order. You got to know where the starting point is. You're starting on A, and then it'll go from there. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And if you just repeat the alphabet as you play that scale, then you'll start to kind of memorize it. So you may not want to do the major scale until a bit later. I'd first learn the minor scale and then possibly lay the major scale on it. But at the end of the day, if you start to merge everything, if you look out into the future, you can see this one position here. This is position number 5 again. We've got the pentatonic in the dark blue, and then the major scale, including the dark blue and the light blue, and then the G-shape position in the red laid on top of it, which is actually a C chord now, even though it's a G shape if it was in the open position. You can see how these kind of overlap each other on it. The cage system overlaps on the pentatonic scale. The pentatonic scale overlaps on top of the major scale. And if you can kind of see this whole thing, once you start to do this after a while, you'll start to be able to pick out this thing. And if you think about it, then you get into a little bit of theory now on this. You're going to say, okay, the pentatonic scale is taking the 7-scale alphabet and breaking it down into 5 pentatonic. That's what the dark blue is. And then obviously all the blue are all 7 notes. That would be the whole thing. The whole musical alphabet was 7 notes. And then if you wanted to break this down into basically a C chord, which is a major chord, and a major chord has 3 notes, then you can see the shape within it. The shape within it has 3 notes in it that basically repeat within this chord, which is a C chord. And that's how these things can kind of overlap on each other. You can learn the patterns, and then you can start learning the theory that's on it. But the pattern is the first thing you probably want to see, that it all kind of overlaps. And the first pattern I would work the pentatonic scale, and I would work the pentatonic scale in the home position of position 5. Home position of the 5th fret, position number 1. Now these are the rest of the links for the major scale. So this is position 1 on the major, and then it would connect down here to position 2. And you can just do the alphabet. You got to know that you're starting on B now. But if you were to finger this thing, actually finger it on the guitar, you could just say the alphabet as you go, which if you do repeatedly can start to help you to memorize the actual notes, because it goes in order: B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. Then here's position 3, starts on D. And then if you just say the alphabet from there, D, E, F, G, as you finger it, it just goes in order. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then position 4, and again, it goes in order. If you know it starts at E, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, A, F, G. And then if you start on position 1 and go backwards, go to the prior position, then you're on position 5, because we went in, position 1 is in the middle. Now we're reversed around the loop to position 5. And then you got in order, G is the end, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on and so forth. So again, you can see how it all ties together. It would take a long time to kind of be able to finger all that, obviously, from the start, but you can see how these things kind of will merge together at some point in time. So if you learn the open positions in the chord shapes, and then you start learning the pentatonic scale. Then as you gradually move forward and start thinking about moving up the shapes and thinking about the major scale and whatnot, you'll see how it all kind of overlaps in and of itself. But it's easiest to do that thinking about the whole fretboard in terms of, you know, one scale, or one pattern, which would be one scale pattern, which would be an A. And I would suggest using the this pattern, which would be an A minor or C major pattern.